or credit contraction.
So you want them to intervene on margin requirements?
So you have to, not only do you have to employ them more actively, but you also have to vary them to counterbalance. So it used to be the case when I was young that, they changed the margin requirements in stocks, up and down, depending on the market levels. They have to go back to that. That's what I think is the answer.
Okay, we have the solution for the future. I think we should open to questions to the floor at this time. And have I missed something of the book, a part of the book that you would like to talk?
No, I think it's we covered it.
So let's. I think there is a mic. Could you please use a microphone?
And I may have difficulty in hearing because I.
Yeah, the question is, we have not spoken about the impact that this financial bubble or meltdown will have on many of these periphery countries, politically speaking, because I'm very much afraid that many of these nascent democracies will basically have, because of the economic crisis, since they're not that stable, will be forced to entertain different political systems, like the Chavez situation or, the Ortegas or the Moraleses or whatever. I wonder what your opinion is about this danger that I think is very serious for our system here.
No, I think you are absolutely right to be concerned, and unless we do it, the system will not survive. However, when you look at the troublemakers in the world, the Bolivarian Revolution, if you have oil over $100, you can have a Bolivarian revolution. With oil at 70, Chavez days are numbered. Iran, Russia, these countries, and you see, you had because of the commodity bubble and particularly the high price of oil, you had this strange phenomenon of countries rich in natural resources having autocratic regimes opposed to the United States and also opposed generally to, let's say, what I call open society. And I think that if only we were willing to stand up for those principles of open society and be concerned with the system, not only with our self-interest, then I think those dictators or what I call patronage societies would deflate, and we would actually have a more stable political system. But for that, we have to change fundamentally what we stand for and recognize that we have, having had a leading position in the world, we have an obligation to the world, which we have absolutely abandoned.
Along the lines of ethical obligations, looking at a larger picture, I go back to the South Sea bubble in England in the 1700s, as well as John Law's, I'll call it economic pathology, where he took us off coins and went to currency. And those were de facto empty of any morality. They were totally schemes, if you will, and we know about Enron, but it appears as though the same thing, and my concern, I'm actually a pastor, is that we don't have any reverence for all people except me, rather than me and thee. I mean, what are we going to do to get back integrity and sanity into the soul so we don't get on these hyper games of greed.
Well, you know, you raise a very big issue, but I have to point out that the saying pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell, related to money which was coins, not paper. So it is in the nature of markets that they are actually amoral. Morality doesn't enter into the markets. That's one of the reasons why they function very well. Now, if I may say,
There's no reflexivity.
what?
There's no reflexivity then.
Well, no, there is reflexivity,
Of
but you don't have the moral issues in a well-functioning market. However, exactly because morality doesn't enter into the market mechanism, you can't leave it to the market mechanism to take care of all the political issues that need to be resolved. And that's why you need politics, which is not, in other words, that's what's wrong with market fundamentalism, the idea that you can leave it all to the markets. No, there are moral issues, there are political issues, and those issues, that's where morality does enter into it. And that's where I think that in some ways we have been unfaithful to our own principles.
Let's have one at a time, I think. Okay.
Let me say, with all due respect, Mr. Soros, that I think you have the self-reinforcing causation exactly backwards. You say that the government has helped markets every time there's been a crisis. Rather, I would say that markets, when they get out of line, have a natural tendency to correct and deleverage as people lose money, you know. However, the government's response, time and time again, has been to re-lever the system, perpetuating the malinvestment caused by the last bubble and creating new malinvestment by further distorting market prices. Thus, today we are paying the piper for reinflating the bubbles of the past. For example, the Fed transformed the tech bubble into the bigger real estate bubble via negative interest rates, which you've talked about, negative real interest rates. Now, even the U.S. Treasury cannot lever enough to counter the deleveraging we see throughout the real economy, necessary by decades of malinvestment. If we just let the previous bubbles run their course, rather than letting the government transform them into bigger bubbles via easy credit, we would not have the super bubble as we do now. Thoughts?
Well, you know, you can argue that it's all the fault of the regulators. But if you didn't have central banks, if you didn't have market regulators, you wouldn't actually have functioning markets. So you would have a much more primitive existence. You wouldn't have had this super bubble, because that is clearly generated by the regulators. But you effectively would not have the global capitalist system, which you think could function without government regulation.
Great. Let me just add to that I think the central banks get too much credit for the good things and too much blame for the bad things. Greenspan is the extreme of that. I think he had a good run.
Yeah. Look, ever since you've had financial markets, you have had financial crises. And the history of central banking, of the whole market, has been crises followed by reforms. That's how central banking developed. You only had the Federal Reserve System since, 1912. So it's the crises and the response to crises that then led to reforms that led to the evolution of regulation. In following that gentleman's ideology, for the last 25 years, we abandoned the need for regulation. We responded, actually, in 1982, when you had the global banking crisis, and the banks were broke. if you didn't intervene, the system